Hello, we are here in beautiful Chennai on the Zoho campus. Zoho prides itself as having a unique culture and approach at business, at looking at business decidedly different, non-mainstream, while being still a for-profit business. So I'm here as a member of a group of analysts who are invited by Zoho to experience culture firsthand by immersing ourselves into it and to see the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. So with me is Vijay Sundaram. He's Zoho's Chief Strategy Officer, and well, he wants to help us understand a little better. Well, lots better actually. So, welcome Vijay.
Thank you.
As usual, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And let's basically dive right into it. So, Zoho is an Indian company, as opposed to many American companies. Sridhar, the co-founder and CEO, has an extensive US-based education. So other people as well, you for example. So what I'm wondering is in how far this blend of different cultures is part of what influences the Zoho philosophy.
At the core of this, right, actually it's a good question because we come from a different background. Mm-hmm. The company is founded or thought about in a completely different country. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain, what is the culture you go with? Mm-hmm. So the normal thing that you wind up doing say, company started by immigrants in the US, mm-hmm. is you follow the US model. And that's largely because your company tends to be bootstrapped, it tends to be funded, VC funded, there's certain norms, you have to play with it, and that's the footprint that you leave, right? Mm-hmm. In our case, because we were bootstrapped, maybe we had a little bit more freedom how we were going to establish this. And also I would say the founding team had certainly starting with Sridhar, had a much stronger sense of what they wanted to do. So what kind of stamp did they want to leave? What's the kind of culture they wanted to take? So that doesn't mean you ignore one thing or the other. Most Indians are somewhat philosophical in their thinking, and that's part of your culture. You can't walk out of that, right? That's part of what you are. And alongside that, you are in a different country and you start to look at the good things over there that might work in the context of a corporation. I'll give you one example. Focus on the customer. The intense focus on building a business to serve the customer is invaluable. It is in many ways exemplified in the US. Yeah. Of course, there are bad examples, but plenty of good ones. Yeah. So that's one of the things you can pick up. Bring that in, but you still infuse your own sense of how the company would be in terms of its own culture and growth.
Put that into some more concrete words, please. Okay. So what is the difference between the American way of being customer-centric and, let's quote it, the Indian way, the Zoho way in particular of being customer-centric?
Right. No, I was talking of even the notion of being customer-centric, right? Yeah. A lot of companies are built because they are thinking about their products or they're family-owned and they're thinking about what they want to do. The focus in a highly competitive startup environment in the US forces you to focus entirely on the customer. Because if you don't, you won't survive because everybody else is doing the same thing. So that's what I meant. Your primary focus becomes, what am I going to do for the customer? And then you build your team alongside that. So where it might be a little bit different is in our case, we also focus on the employees because there's a long-term play here, right? Yeah. So you want to, as you know now, we have people here who have been over 20 years and 25 years, and they're still in their 40s. So you have that is part of the culture which puts employees in the middle of that equation too. So that's an example of something that differs from an American system, right? Where employees are, it's not that people don't value employees, not at all, but it's that you don't necessarily see employees as being with you for decades. The average American switches 6 or 7 jobs in their career, if not more, these days, right? So that's an accepted norm. And we perhaps did not come in with that norm when we started the company, that this is going to be an enterprise that's going to stay for a long time, which means we're going to build people who have the skills and capabilities and ensure the continuity of the organization. So that might be an example of why we might.
Okay.
Does that make it clearer?
Makes perfectly sense. So, but as a part of the welcome letter, you wrote a couple of very interesting sentences bringing tech and agriculture into a similar context. So what is this similar or even same context that you see for both these very different, vastly different industrial sectors?
We had talked about looking at agriculture and technology. If you look historically, agriculture was a small business, right? There were small farmers. Almost in any country, even before mechanization, before all these things, right? Agriculture was a small business. It was usually a family-owned business, and for generations they would be in agriculture. The startup culture is similar too. You start as very small companies. They all just get birthed, right? And then you have all these different companies that start to form. Similarly, you have in agriculture, you have multiple plots of land, and that covers the whole canvas of agriculture. But what has happened over time, and the similarity between these two, is now you go past several decades of evolution and you see what happens. So agriculture transformed itself to what, at least in the US context, is called big ag, or big agriculture. And usually that has a negative connotation, because what it means monopolistic practice. It means very large companies that have completely lost touch. It means companies that have created, that are trying to get the maximum produce out of the land, not worrying so much about pollution or pesticides or fertilizers or any of those things, or even the quality of the food or is sort of become secondary. It's all become the produce, how you can get it out, how you can dominate the industry. So agriculture grew by just absorbing all these companies. The largest companies grew by just buying out all these farmers, and that is what is called big ag. So that's studied well. The negative connotations of that are clear now, which is poorer products, lack of viability of agriculture as even an occupation for a mid-sized or small farmer. And of course, erosion of resources. The topsoil has been completely eroded. It's only there because it's fertilized, right? So something similar has happened in technology. You had all these small companies. It was a very verdant and competitive environment. And all of a sudden, these companies started acquiring, and now you have the notion of big tech. That's a term. We've all used the term big tech. So the same thing has happened here. A few companies have risen to the top. And curiously, I saw a parallel in what they did and what big ag is doing. They want to be monopolistic. They want to buy out people who would compete with them if they cannot compete. And they start to influence everything, just like big ag. They start to influence everything from political policy to markets, access to capital, all of those things. And in the case of big tech, it's gone even a step further, because they talk to you and me. They talk to consumers. And so they have a huge impact on how you and I think. You've seen in the last few years how technology has impacted political debates all over the world, and most people will agree it's created more divides than more commonality, which was what was predicted earlier, that when information moves out, things will actually even out. It's been the opposite. More division has happened. So, and some of that is because of this concentration of these companies. So that's why I made the comparison between the two, because we are following in technology something similar that happened with big ag, and similar negative consequences, even worse, are unfolding.
What do you think I mean, to some extent, growth is not bad. I mean, this growth is what made most of us, or many of us, raised our income, raised our standards, basically, our living standards of living. Not true for everybody, but on a general level. What do you think are the root causes for the negative implications that come more and more into picture?
I think some of it starts, at least in the way we look at it, some of it starts with how the company sets its governing principles. What is the company run for? And in a capitalist system, especially if you look at how that has evolved in the United States definitely more strongly than in Europe. It's since the 30s and 40s, it's evolved more into a form of capitalism that is responsible fundamentally to shareholders of the company. As soon as stockholding became, it's a great idea. It still is a fantastic idea to have public owned stocks in the company. It's a fantastic idea, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the primary and only governing principle of organizations became that I have to manage the returns to the shareholders. Again, that was not a terrible objective to start with. It was not an unfair objective or an improper objective to start with. What turned that into areas where we've seen negative outcomes is that became the sole intent. So companies would do things to the markets responded. The markets would respond by punishing companies immediately or rewarding companies immediately. So then becomes a circle where the company is just trying to satisfy how the market responds. And that results in all kinds of things, not the least of which, and many people have talked about this, short-termism. Most CEOs who come into these large companies are there for a period of time. They're contracted to do a certain thing in the period of time. They really don't care what happens beyond that period. So that's, by definition, it's set up as a short-term agenda. So that's one of the things that's come in. And then you see in the last few years what happens. Companies, it goes to the extreme when you have an environment where there's recession or even post-pandemic, and companies are buying back their stock. They have excess capital. That capital could be deployed in the time when the economy is slow or staggering or trying to get on its feet and receiving subsidies from the government. Yet what did most of these companies do, particularly in big tech? They bought back their shares. And the justification there for that from the corporate finance perspective is it's returning value to the shareholders, right? So again, it shows you, in fact, there's the absurdity of companies taking on more debt and then buying back shares. How does that ever make sense, right? So it is purely a notion of managing the company for the market. So that, I think, has happened more and more in big tech. That's one part of it. The second part of it is anti-competitive behavior. Big tech has acted like the railroad companies of a century and plus ago, or like big agriculture, or like the pharmaceutical industry, where they don't tolerate competition anymore. So, which is why you see this especially in Europe, M&A is looked at very, very deeply now, because M&A is viewed as ways to stifle competition. Because companies have so much, once you become big, you've got political influence, you've got all this capital, you have all this money, and you can do everything with your money, and your stock keeps going up. So you've got money, you've got, you can acquire through stock or cash or any combination, and you simply go about buying out your competitors. We've seen that. You could see Facebook and WhatsApp. And I can give you plenty of such examples, right? So time and again you see this. So in a sense, that's what's happened to big tech. So you asked about the negative connotations, concentration, monopoly, the anti-competitive behavior, focus solely on shareholders. And of course, today we see issues about complete no respect for the privacy of citizens all across the world. And it's taking regulation, particularly originating in Europe, to bring this into check.
You repeatedly used the term capitalism in combination with money. So that seems like you object to the notion that capitalism is solely focused on money, funds. So what then is the Zoho, your definition of capitalism?
We are a capitalist company.
No, you are. Well, you're a for-profit business.
We are absolutely for profit, and we are capitalists, and we support that system. And the notion is, how do you understand what capitalism means to you? So capitalism, in the purest sense of the term, it can be seen as say returns to shareholders or maximizing value, if you want to think about it, right? A lot of industries and consultancies have been built on the back of that single principle, that what you do, and this propagated probably from Milton Friedman, that the goal of a company is only to maximize its return to its shareholders. So that becomes a fairly narrow definition of capitalism, which is definitely not the way it is in Europe, as an example, or in Asia. And we look at capital, Zoho, particularly as what constitutes capital. It's our ability to generate positive funds and profits and positive cash flow and keep growing that. It is our people, that's capital. It's human capital, and we have to grow that. We have our culture. We see our culture as something that endures over a period of time. That's what attracts people to our company. That's what keeps people in our company. That is a form of capital.
Yeah.
So we see a broader definition of capital, which is not just associated with funds, but with long-standing assets, which actually determine the future of a company. So intangibles that will never make it in a balance sheet is capital for us. In most companies, capital has to be captured on the balance sheet. For us, it's off balance sheet. So our capital, most of it is off balance sheet.
So now culture is a very interesting word in this context. Everybody and every company says it has its culture. All of them, which is good, and maybe sometimes even right.
Yeah.
Okay, cynicism off. What do you see the role of, or what do you think is the role of culture in fostering a more, I call it, humane way of capitalism?
Yeah. It is, I think you put your finger on it. Culture is at the core of what we do. So in our view, we talk about capital and what represents capital. The most enduring form of capital for us is culture. And I think it sounds weird, it's not philosophical, it's very practical. You know, it's the system of practices, your ethics, your how you treat people, how you treat customers, what are you building a company for, all of these things, how you treat people, you know, where you're willing to make investments, how will you grow your system perhaps even outside your company. All that is part of a culture, all that is part of an ethical construct that defines the company, right? So for us, we see that as not just our biggest asset, it's the most long enduring asset. So so there's a lot of energy and emphasis that goes on within the leadership in our company to understand what that is. It's a bit intangible. We can't, you ask us to write it out, you can't write it out. You could probably describe it through a few practices or through several. We can talk about how we deal with people. As an example, Sridhar made an announcement internally in the company some weeks ago saying, you know, I know companies are laying off, it's not going to happen here. Right? That's a certain type of, maybe that's part of that culture. You know, a CEO bold enough to say that even though I can't see how far this pit is going to be, how deep this pit is going to be, I'm going to make a statement like that. So that's part of culture. You know, you're not trying to keep options for yourself. You're not trying to find out, manage your risk at the expense of the employees being sure what is going to happen to them. That's culture. So I think we have, that is our most enduring asset. It's transmitted really through people working here, which is why we reward and encourage people to work with us for the long term, because you imbibe that. It's not taught somewhere. You work with people, you see how it works, you see how they treat people, you see how they work with customers. Humility is one part of it. Corporate humility is a very important thing these days, right? And I think in the norm of and you can see, you can see the, again, in big tech, you can see the big headed names, right? And it's exactly the opposite of that, right? So that's an example of culture that we want to endure. So we wouldn't even hire people who would fit into that mold. Anyone self-promotional probably won't fit here. They probably leave because nobody really tries to promote themselves that much here. So I think that's why we see culture as a set of these different things, how we treat people, how we behave, how we create examples for people. I mean, not perfect, but that's how it all evolves. And then we leave it behind. So when these set of leaders leave, there's some guidance for the next set of people that goes on. And the Japanese have studied this too. They have a different culture, but that's another thing. The culture permeates within their companies as well.
Coming to a kind of a closure, in a sense, Zoho, well, not in a sense, Zoho is working in a pretty much set environment.
Yeah.
In a sense, using this environment to change the environment. So now, well, as a fairly successful company, I mean, you're $1 billion+ US company, meanwhile, still in the grand scheme of things, this is not the big shark.
Yeah.
So you're swimming in a shark pond.
Yeah.
What I want to get at is, in how far is a company, a single company, able to have an impact on adopting this, changing the system to something that may or may not be better. It surely might be different.
Yeah.
Whether it's better, we'll find out after, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think is the impact of one company?
Yeah. Let me start with a different point first. We do believe it is better. A company is run
I too, by the way.
A company is run by convictions, right? And you need a certain set of convictions to build a company. That's that ethical framework you work with, and some convictions come out of that.
Yeah.
And so our convictions lead us to believe this is a better way. We don't doubt that at all. Others are free to decide whether it is or not, but we don't doubt that, right? So there's a
future will decide.
Yes. There's a very strong conviction that that's where we're going. So how would one company impact it? Surprisingly, the biggest impacts are made by a few mavericks who take different turns. History is full of such examples. Of companies that have taken a different path and created something a little bit different. So in our case, we have our company is headquartered in India. We have we're more and more well known in India. We can have a lot of impact here because we are rooted here. We understand the systems here, and part of that conviction is we have to do something. We are all a product of this culture, product of this education. People like me and Sridhar, we were educated here for almost nothing. At the highest quality education you could probably get in the world for almost nothing. So in some ways, what is your duty to do? Is there something you can give back? And without trying to sound too altruistic, it's just that people start to follow. Other companies start to see. Already, Sridhar gets invited in all kinds of corporate events. People want to see his viewpoint. So you start to influence people beyond just what your company can do. Your company itself can do a lot. In fact, it's surprising what a $1 billion company can do that a $100 billion company does not do. So a lot of it is the mindset. It's not the size of your coffer. It's what are you willing to do with it, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is people, as I mentioned, people start to watch you. They start to see what else you do. And then maybe you inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. At every one of our events, customer events, we'll have people who come to us, customers will come to us and tell us, I'm here to look at a product, I'm here to learn your product. But I'm also inspired by how you run your company, and I want to use those examples. I want to do that. I'll give you another example. We have partners who resell our products all over the world. And you may know one of the things that Zoho does is we hire in rural areas. We don't go to the large cities. We hire from rural areas. We hire from people who probably won't have access to college education. We don't even make college education a necessary part for hiring someone. Some of our partners have taken that up. A partner in UK has taken that up. A partner in Germany has taken that up. They've told us that, we see the wisdom of this. In our own way, we're going to try it. So they go to some other region of Germany or UK or maybe even a different country and say they're going to try something similar. So you do have an influence, because of the power of the idea, not the power of your money. So if that fits, you have a lot more influence than you think. And then you fast forward over time. I talked about long-termism. You think 10 years, you think 20 years, it will be a cascade.
So it's slow. Yeah. You're reaching the tipping point.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
Cool, great. That's been amazing. Thanks, Vijay.
Thank you.
As usual, it's a pleasure talking to you. It's always enlightening and fun.
Yeah, wonderful talking to you. Thank you for taking the time.
See you.
Yeah.
Same.